His research interests broadly cover security issues in software, systems, and networks. And today, Juan will be talking about a security evaluation of Tor Bridges.
Okay, thank you, Pratik, for the introduction. Okay, so this is joint work with Sergeant Matic and Carmela Troncoso. Unfortunately, they couldn't actually make it, so you have to bear with me for the time. Okay, so the talk is about internet censorship. Okay, so we have users in countries that may actually be limiting access to internet resources. Okay, and those users actually may want to bypass those checks to actually access those resources of their interest. So one potential solution for addressing this issue is onion routing, and in particular, one could use an anonymity network like Tor. So with Tor, we have a user that is trying to access Facebook, right? And there's going to be a circuit established through three hops of relays, which are also called onion routers. And through that, like encrypted channel, then the data would actually reach Facebook, right? So now the thing changes a little bit when we're talking about like censorship. Okay, so now we have the user that actually wants to access Facebook behind like the sensor or inside the sensor country. And in this case, actually the user is gonna be connecting to a bridge rather than to a relay. And the reason for this is like relays have like public known IP addresses, okay? And then it's very easy for a sensor to just like block access to any known like IP address of a bridge. So then the bridge basically like hides the IP addresses that not appear in the network consensus, right? So the user will actually get the address from BridgeDB from a bridge and connect to it and be able to access Facebook. So another thing that the bridges actually support is that PT down there that is pluggable transports. So basically it's like the sensor could also block any communication that looks like Tor traffic. Okay, so in order to avoid that, Tor actually added like these pluggable transports that are basically grabbers, so to make your protocol look like either another like benign protocol or maybe like to encapsulate it inside another benign protocol. Okay, so bridges are basically the IP address not available. They are the first hop. They use pluggable transports, and they can actually be public or private, and they are default. I'm going to be talking about those next. Okay, so what is the goal of this work? Basically, we want to perform the first systematic study of the security of the Tor bridge infrastructure. So there's been quite a bit of work in like Tor bridges, okay? Most of it has focused on like developing secure pluggable transport as well as like techniques for actually de-anonymizing the IP address of the Tor bridges. And we're interested both in the public bridges, and we're going to be measuring like a bunch of like security relevant properties of the public bridges, like the population, the stability, the way they actually deploy these pluggable transports, the way they actually use ports, and also we're going to be seeing how to rank actually like bridges. But we are also interested in looking at the private bridges and private proxies. So the difference is that the public bridges are available to any like Tor user, okay, and they actually report. They send like their descriptors to the bridge authorities, so they're basically known to like for example, the Tor project, right? However, the private bridges, these are set up by like organizations or individuals, right, for their own use, and they don't actually report like bridge descriptors, right? So typically they are not actually known. It's not known like how many of these like private bridges are there. And we also observe like people are actually using these private proxies that basically, we're going to see what they are, but it's an entry point also to the Tor network, right? But it's not really a bridge, okay? It's not a node of the network. It's just a proxy that forwards to either a bridge or a relay. Okay, and we'll be also measuring like the population. We'll be clustering them to see different type of clusters, and we'll also look at the hosting of those bridges. Okay, so basically, in order to actually analyze, for example, the private bridges, we first need to discover them, because basically they are not known, right? So the way we actually do this is we leverage like two known issues in Tor, okay? These issues have actually been known for a long time, at least since October 2010, okay? But they are still not fixed, right? So one thing is like vanilla Tor, which is the default protocol, looks or actually uses a TLS handshake. But there's something distinctive in that TLS handshake is the certificates that are actually used are very distinctive. So it's very easy just by looking at the certificates to differentiate between a vanilla Tor handshake and a normal TLS handshake, okay? This issue is known, but it's not going to be fixed, okay? Because like pluggable transport were deployed, and that's a better solution to actually like try to address these kind of issues. The second issue is like all bridges has an open OR port, okay? And that OR port actually offers like vanilla Tor. protocol, right? And this is despite the fact that the bridge may not be offering vanilla Tor to like users to use it, right? And this is known, and like the Tor, I mean, there is a backtracking issue for this one, and they want to fix it, but it's actually a difficult fix, so it hasn't been addressed yet. Okay, so what we do is like we use 3 publicly available data sets. So first we use scan search engines, like Sodan and Census specifically. Okay, these scan search engines is basically they perform periodically scans of the IPv4 internet address space. Okay, and they index the information. And they particularly scan some ports using TLS. Okay, so that basically allows us to query the scan search engines and say, have you observed any IP addresses that actually have certificates like look like Tor certificates? Okay, and that would actually give us some candidate breach IP addresses. Then we use Collector. Collector is a service from the Tor network that actually provides like node level, like breach and relay level data, okay? And some of that data is like usage statistics, for example, and because some is sensitive, it's actually sanitized, all right? So what we want to do also is, in addition to analyzing like the security properties of the public breaches, is to understand if there is any data in Collector that actually is sensitive and should be sanitized, and currently is not being sanitized. Okay, so in order to discover the breaches, it's a 5-step process. We first query Census and Sodan to actually obtain the candidate IP addresses for the services, for the, like might be running breaches. Then we filter relays, because they will also appear here, but the IP addresses are known, so they are easy to filter, right? We verify the IP address. That means we actually connect to the IP address using vanilla Tor and actually download the breach descriptor to actually confirm that indeed is an onion router. Then we actually identify proxies. So what we do here is like we compare the IP address that we are connecting to with the IP address that comes back inside the breach descriptor. And if there is a discrepancy between those two, then we are actually connecting really to a proxy that is forwarding to a backend relay or breach. And then the final step is like, now we are left with the breaches, and then we look in Collector. If that breach is actually in Collector, then it's a public breach. And if it doesn't appear in Collector, then it's a private breach. And after we've done that, we actually perform some clustering also. I'm not going to detail because of lack of time. And then we perform some ranking also on those breaches, and I'll be talking about the results. Okay, so let me take like the results of our like analysis of like the public breaches. So the first thing we look at is the breach populations. Okay, so this is how the breach population has actually evolved over time. And one thing is like if we look at the end of our study, basically that's April 2016, we see that there's like 5.3 thousand active public breaches. But of those, less than half actually carry clients. Okay, so then that's actually plotted there with like the blue line, and the black line is the estimation that the Tor metrics, which is a different service from the Tor network, but actually provides aggregate statistics rather than per node statistics. Okay, so the conclusion here is that basically there are different ways to actually measure the population. We need to take into account that in the next slide. So then we look at the breach stability, right? And the first thing here that we see is that, okay, so 55% of the breaches, they only live less than 1 day. Okay? And that basically means they don't actually carry users because of that short lifespan. And that actually explains the difference in the previous slide about the number of like active breaches versus the ones with clients, right? And then we actually also measure that the breaches that do have clients, they are actually very long-lived, okay? So actually they have a median lifetime of 4 months. And not only that, but they actually rarely change IP address, okay? So basically the conclusion is there's 2 parts of the population. One is like very unstable and is not actually used, but the ones that are actually used are actually very stable, and that actually has an implication. It means that a sensor can actually use like more aggressive blocking policies that are currently being used. So previous work has measured like the Great Firewall of China, for example, will actually just block IP addresses for 25 hours, but we show that they could actually be blocking like much longer without actually creating many false positives. Okay, so we also look at the pluggable transport deployment, right? And what we observe there is like, okay, so basically a breach can offer multiple pluggable transports at the same time. We actually see that 77% of the breaches, they only offer vanilla Tor, which is widely considered not secure because it's easy to identify, as I mentioned earlier. But then the rest of breaches, they are actually mostly providing combinations. And the problem with these combinations of pluggable transports is they have some contradictory like security properties, okay? So you may have a breach with like ops 2 and ops 4, but OPS2 is deprecated, basically, and it's very easy to identify through traffic analysis. So it's very easy to identify the breach through OPS2, and then that basically disables the access through OPS4, right? And similarly, if you have like OPS3 and OPS4 on the same breach, then basically they don't have the same properties. In fact, like OPS4 has reply protection, which OPS3 doesn't have, right? So basically, it's possible to actually confirm that is indeed a breach using OPS3, and that also will also disable like OPS4 for being used. Okay, so basically we have these conflicting security properties in the deployment. We look at the OR port distribution, and basically here we want to see which ports are actually being used. And we see that the top 3 OR ports, they are actually used by 71% of the breaches, okay? And those are like 443, 8443, and 9001, right? And this is important because basically this means that an attacker that is just performing internet-wide scans on these 3 ports can potentially identify 71% of the breaches, of the public breaches. And so this actually, we reported this to the Tor project, right? And basically they've actually changed the way collector processes the OR port, so now they are actually being included as part of the sanitized data, so it shouldn't be able to like generate this kind of like distribution in the future from the collector data. So we also like look at breach ranking. So basically the concept is like not all breaches are equally important, like some will carry more clients, for example, and we actually look at the ranking per country and per pluggable transport, right? And what we show is that an attacker, or a sensor in this case, can actually leverage this kind of information in collector to answer questions like, okay, how well is my blocking working, right? How many breaches I'm not blocking and people are actually using. Not only that, it can identify specific breaches, right, that the clients in its country are actually using, okay? And that actually allows to perform like some targeted de-anonymization. It's like try to go after, like, for example, if the OR ports were available, try to go about with a scan on that specific OR port. And another thing that we find here is basically 91% of the traffic that goes through breaches is using the default breaches that I provided in the Tor browser bundle, okay? And basically those breaches that are provided there, they're not breaches in the strict term because like the IP address can be extracted like from the configuration files on the Tor browser bundle, okay? Now, in general, it doesn't matter because, I mean, the users are still being able to connect to the internet because maybe those default breaches are not always blocked. However, the sensor has the power at any point that he actually wants to disconnect in 91% of the users by, like, for example, responding to an event like the COP in Turkey. Okay, so we also look at the private side of the breaches. And we apply basically the breach discovery that I introduced before, the 5 steps. And I'm going to be presenting the results for April 2016. Basically, through like using the scan search engines on 7 protocols, we were able to de-anonymize 35% of the public breaches on the month, right? Now, we didn't get like 100%, but the reason for that is like 2 main things. It's like first, 55% of those are actually really short-lived, so it doesn't really matter we don't find them, and it's like we're not fast enough to actually find them, right? And some others may be running on other ports that we actually didn't use scans for, right? So those are the main reasons. In addition to like the public breaches, we actually found 684 like private breaches, okay? And another like 645 like private proxies. So that basically means that around like 35% of the breaches, right, extrapolating like what we found here, would actually be like private breaches and the remaining 65% public ones. So then we apply this clustering to actually like see like how actually like, so basically the clustering will tell us if there are breaches that seem to be being run by the same managers, okay, by the same operators. So basically, we find like 5 main types of clusters. Okay, well, the majority of the clusters are singletons, 75% of them. They only have 1 breach, so we ignore those. The ones that actually have more than 1, then we actually see that there's 5 main types. Here are the 3 main types. So in the type 1, you actually have a line of proxies, all forwarding the traffic to a single relay or backend, right? And in general, it's most likely that the backend is actually a relay. That's 74% of the time. And in less cases, it's actually in like 20% is like a public breach, and in only like 5% is like a private breach. And these actually lines can go up to like 100. So the largest we actually see is 178 proxies, all forwarding exactly to the same relay. Okay, and these are like private proxies. We also see the type 2 is basically the same as type 1, but only with a single proxy. Okay, and type 3 is basically there's no proxies. This is just like a bunch of breaches that seem to belong to the same group of people. And basically, we see that the largest one that we see is like 164 like breaches, private breaches that seem to belong to the same organization. And we actually measured a bunch of things on the clusters, and more details are in the paper, right? But like 77% of the time, the proxies and the backend, they are actually in the same IS, okay? So these proxies are really not being used to provide like diversity, like for example on the IP addresses that you get to enter the network, right? And we also measure a bunch of other things. We look at the contact information. We actually find that it's more likely to get contact information in the private breaches actually than in the public breaches, right? Which is a little bit like counterintuitive. And there's a bunch of other things in the paper. So to conclude, we've done a security analysis of the public breach infrastructure. And we find that breaches with clients are actually fairly stable. They live a median of 4 months, right? No IP changes, and that actually enables like a sensor to actually do longer blocking. We find that there is like that when you run multiple pluggable transports, you should try to avoid like they have actually conflicting security properties. We do see that the breaches running like in top 3 OR ports correspond to 71% of all the public breaches, and that actually allow us to do the anonymization. So that actually has generated a patching collector. We analyzed that 95% of the breach traffic uses the default breaches, and basically that defeats the purpose of like using breaches. And also show like how the breach ranking enables targeted attacks, going for a specific breach is important in a country or a specific breach is important for a strong pluggable transport. We do a breach discovery to identify the private breaches. We anonymize 35% of the public breaches. We find over 600 private breaches and 600 proxies, right? And the majority are public, but 35% are private, right? And we analyze the clusters. And finally, I need to conclude that a lot of these things are possible because that open OR port needs to be fixed, right? So the Tor project is aware of this, but they actually, any help there, either manpower or funding, I think they would greatly appreciate it. So with that, I'm done, and I'm open to questions.